Get started. It's good to see you all here. So this is our TBM Tuesdays series. We're gonna start with a quick opener with Nick on the TBM Council team, who's gonna talk about our TBM Council Awards, which is our annual award program going on right now. And then we'll pass over to our other speakers.
Thank you very much. So the first slide, real quick, TBM conference coming up in Miami. This is the most important engagement of the year. It's hosted by TBM Council in partnership with Apptio. Over 1,000 global tech leaders, practitioners. It's going to be absolutely amazing. We have an executive strategy forum for C-level VPs, hundreds of leaders across industries and backgrounds, just sharing their TBM journeys. This is going to be November 10th to the 12th. Miami, Florida, just cannot wait. Who doesn't want to go to Miami in November? Okay, I'm going to jump right into the awards. So I'm excited to announce that nominations are open for the 13th Annual TBM Council Awards. So this is a really powerful, oh, this is the wrong slide. There's the slide. So this is a really powerful opportunity to essentially showcase your TBM achievements on a global stage. And really position your organization as a leader in technology business management. This is to gain positive visibility, since recognition brings credibility, and winning an award can really just generate incredibly valuable internal and external PR. Also, this is the time to celebrate your success and highlight, the tangible impact that you're making with your organization and with the TBM community in general. Finalists receive prominent exposure through our digital channels. They also get custom branded graphics for social media and complimentary or discounted passes to TBM conference. That's, of course, subject to approval. Winners. So the winners of the awards, and I'll show you the award categories in a second. The winners of the awards get spotlighted in a professionally written case study. They get invited to speak on TBM Council's podcast, TBM Tuesday. They're honored at the TBM conference in Miami with a personalized trophy and a lot more perks that they get as well. The submission deadline is Friday, June 27th, but for this audience, I may be able to extend it by a little bit. So if you're interested in applying to an award, I recommend you just reach out to me as soon as possible. My email address is down the bottom. I'll also post that in the chat after I'm done speaking. A bunch of new enhancements for 2025. I won't read them off the screen, but we got a new TBM Professional of the Year award for individuals. We're expanding our regional award opportunities. For one of our categories, we're actually having one winner from each of our 4 regions to make it a little more global in nature. So we're excited about that. And now I'll just jump into the categories real quick before I turn it back over to Matt. So the categories for 2025. Some are very similar to last year, but some we refreshed and just made a little better based on emerging technologies, organization priorities for your businesses. TBM Pioneer. This is the really interesting one. One winner per region. So there will be one TBM Pioneer winner from the Americas, one from the APAC region, one from the EMEA region, and also one from the Japan region. And then all the others you compete against globally against other organizations around the world. And then we get the brand new one, the brand new individual TBM Professional of the Year, and that recognizes specifically outstanding personal achievements. So I'm going to put a link in the chat that will take you to the awards page where you can read longer descriptions, and you can actually see the application questions you'll be asked if you decide to apply. So I'll put that in the chat, put my email in the chat. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. And otherwise, I will turn over to Matt to continue TBM Tuesday.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to see everybody. I would just add, Nick's done fantastic work with the awards. We've got a whole lot of interest coming in, so make sure you get your interest logged and your applications in. The other thing I would note is Jasmine put something out into the chat around early bird pricing. We just had our board invitational last week. We were maxed out. We're doing our EMEA summit next week, and we've got a full room there. So we're expecting a big old crowd down in Miami. So please do jump on early before we run out of room. So everything's on the chat if you need it. But let's get to what we were here to talk about today. One of the things when you dial a little bit back is when I came in, we were talking about really trying to elevate. We had a lot of focus on taxonomy, and that's very important, but we wanted to get into more of what we call Framework 2.0. We spent a lot of time doing that. And as we were building out Framework 2.0, we realized that one of the challenges that we hadn't really addressed was the whole idea of cyber. Cyber is an increasingly important part of technology. And just to kind of put some numbers behind that, when you go look at Gartner data, when they talk to CIOs about their top 5 priorities in 2025, the number 1 priority was manage cyber and risk. So it's the most pressing issue out there. I would note that the 3rd highest priority was demonstrate the business value of technology. And that's why we're going to do this call today. When we had all this focus on cyber, we reached out to Todd Tucker. Interestingly, Todd had my job years ago. And so it was a great opportunity to bring Todd back into the TBM conversation with his group Fair Institute and talk about how we could work together to bring Todd in and help the people in the TBM community understand more about cyber and risk, and then how we can bring people from our TBM community over to the Fair Institute and drive more value in terms of tech value. So let's do this. Let's start. Todd, why don't you give a little bit more of an overview of who you are and the Fair Institute, and then we'll dive into really how we're working together.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt, and really appreciate the opportunity to do this. Jasmine, it's great to work with you again, and I see some familiar names. Lisa, hello. It's good to kind of see you again. Speaking of the awards, like Lisa was part of the Cox Enterprises team that won, I don't know, 2014, 2015, like way early on with that program. So very cool to see that you're on, Lisa.
Yep.
Anyway, so I have, as of last year, joined the Fair Institute in a similar role that I had to the TBM Council. And the Fair Institute is a nonprofit. It was built in the same model that the TBM Council was. We knew the founder of it going 20 years back. And he reached out to us when we were running the council and said, hey, how did you guys do that? So we basically shared the whole model, and it was built in a very similar kind of approach. The topic, though, is different. The focus for us is on measuring and managing risk, and usually an emphasis on cyber risk. So it's a model that, similar to TBM, provides, sort of the science and the art of managing something with data. In our case, it being cyber risk. So you can measure cyber risk with the FAIR model in financial terms. So, what you're really doing with it is you're looking at various factors. It's called the factor analysis of information risk model. So you look at various factors, you measure those factors, and you assess risk in a term called annual loss exposure. And so you get to a number, just like you get to with, the cost and consumption of technology and so forth. So that's the nature of this. And there's a whole discipline and behind it. The organization has 17,000 members. The FAIR model is part of the Open Group standards as well. So there's a version of it called Open FAIR. So the adoption has been really good. But, Matt, back to like our collaboration, I think what we saw early on is just as the TBM Council and those that are embracing TBM to manage value, cost, consumption, risk, et cetera, there's, learnings that can come from what we do with the FAIR Institute that we can, certainly bring and make part of the conversation. That's the point of today, right?
Absolutely. And Todd, I think one of the things I'd love you to start with is, and you showed this last week, but you talked, and you don't have to talk it through unless you have it, but the FAIR model. Why don't you just walk people through just that? Because I think it's a real simplistic way to think of these two big factors. And then we can also then transition into how that then links into the TBM world. So do you want to take a walk through that?
Yeah, and let me just do this because I'll bring it up on the screen.
There you go.
Let me know you guys can see it.
See it.
As soon as I figure it out there, full screen. It's doing the wrong thing. Let me just go. Sorry, I'm just going to leave it here. So Yeah, it's a multiple monitors thing, right? So the FAIR model, you can see it here. It's a little bit of a simplified version, but it looks at a very traditional kind of view of risk, and especially cyber risk. Is you'll typically look at threats, vulnerabilities, and impact. So anybody who's kind of grown up in the security world, you've typically learned that, threat, vulnerability, impact, or threat, vulnerability, asset. So those are terms that are pretty familiar to anybody that's, kind of come up through the security ranks. Well, what FAIR did is it really dissected that into more constituent kind of components that were measurable so that you could actually assess and then model to understand risk. The challenge with risk that you don't have so much with like a cost model is that risk is dealing with unknowns, a lot of unknowns, right? So you never know, specifically, hey, what is the loss event frequency going to be, or what is the loss magnitude going to be? That's the nature of risk, is it's an unknown. And so the model and the methodology behind it deals with that uncertainty and all of the different factors that you see. But, it's almost like a TBM model. It starts with understanding things at kind of the constituent level and calculating up to getting to the annual loss exposure, or there's some other ways of kind of looking at it, but it's a dollar figure ultimately for risk. So a lot of commonalities. The only thing I say is, like, when we look at return on investment, for example, the TBM taxonomy and the model pair well with we have a taxonomy you can see on the left side here for cyber risk scenarios. And then we have the model itself. They're very analogous, but just looking at things through a different lens, really. And so when we wrote the paper, and we'll get into that a little bit more, we kind of talk about these different elements and how they fit together. But you can think of it as, when we're talking about return, a lot of that return is about how do you measure the reduction in risk. That's the primary lever that we talk about in the paper. There's 4, but really that's the one that's most important. So to do that, those two things come into play. The risk scenario taxonomy, which looks at, as you can see there, threats, assets, methods, and effects. I won't go into the details on those. And then the model for actually calculating risk, including like risk reduction through this. So, it's like I said, it's got a lot of similarities to TBM. You want to drive this with data, so just like TBM, a lot of the same conversations I see here, which is about, we don't have the data, or data is not good enough, or all the same kind of things that you hear when you're talking about TBM. We deal with it with FAIR and cybersecurity and risk on this side.
So Todd, let me, oh, wait, we got a hand up. Let me, Dan McGrath, you had a question?
Yeah, and first, thanks for letting me jump in here. Not to be too disruptive, and I may be asking something you're going to answer down the road, but benchmarking, right? I'm a recent grad of the exec program, so I'm kind of a newbie here on the phone, but you all obviously made, and you should make, a big deal about benchmarking. Benchmarking for this seems to be taking advantage of maybe somebody else's bad experience.
Mm-hmm.
To quantify. So when you're talking about risk and you're talking about benefit in kind of a DevSecOps agile environment that moves pretty fast, how do you quantify? And maybe this is for later slides. How do you quantify? Is it benchmarking to quantify the cost of not doing something versus the cost of doing something?
Yeah. So I think it's a great question, and I think the role of benchmarking is a little different, Dan, with cyber risk, and it has a big role, and typically it's involved in understanding the what we call loss magnitude, and there's some that plays on the how often you can expect a loss, what we call loss event frequency. It plays a part in both, but what you'll see is that there are reports out there like the Verizon DBIR report. IBM actually partners with a company called Ponemon Institute, and there's several of these that are very influential in the industry to understand what is the expected cost of a breach? So maybe ransomware, for example, what's the cost per record associated with a breach of PHI or PII, things that are, personally sensitive data. So it does play a role in that, because organizations want to base their risk on factors that are, reliable, that are industry based. If they don't have their own experience with it, which hopefully is the case, although a lot of times you've suffered a breach, and so you can use that as well. So it does play that role, and then it also plays a role on the breach side, but because, in other words, the loss event frequency side. But because your controls play such a big part there, you really have to understand your control environment, like how secure are we, so to speak. It's what we talk about when we say susceptibility. So it's not as easy to just say, oh, our industry is facing a ransomware breach once every 1.2 years and, something like that, because the average of the industry may not reflect where you guys are. You may have very strong controls in place, and so you wouldn't just want to use the average there. So it does play a big part. I would say it's a bigger part on the cost side, in other words, the loss magnitude side, but it plays a part throughout kind of the way we look at risk. Hopefully that's helpful.
It is. I mean, I think you understood through the detailed response that the nature of my question is always about these arguments on prioritizing against a portfolio of solutions projects.
Right.
They're a lot more easier to identify in cyber, like you just said. There may not be anything except your event brand new, right, to benchmark against. And so you're fighting for funding. I'm 100% federal state government person. That they are, as you know, they are very compartmentalized on cost. They don't project forward. The operating budget is a continuance unless it's planned of last year's budget, with possible reduction. So yeah, the essence of that is this is extremely important to my customer base. But quantifying an argument within the TBM taxonomy on the cyber side of the equation, yeah, that I see that. That's why I was interested in jumping on this call. It is a consummate part of a conversation, and I'm just looking for a better way to answer the question. So thank you for your input.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me make a point and a connection, and then we'll go. This will bring Todd back in. So the point I'd like to make is I want everyone to stay on top of TBM, because we are going to be doing much more with benchmarking moving forward, and we're going to have potentially a bunch of data that we can bring to bear. So we're going to focus on this from the broader picture, and then even as you guys just talked about it from the risk side. So stay tuned on that. The thing I want to do, I just want to bring in one of the things we just issued was it's part of the TBM modernization. It's what we call Framework 2.0. And so let me share this real quick. Are you guys seeing the framework here? Somebody, okay, I see some nods.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So we wanted to make a lot of focus around this. And the reason is this is what, when we've talked to companies, the people that take a very measured approach and a proactive approach to how they implement TBM are the ones that get ahead. And so when you start to look at this, when we're talking about something we call TBM by design, it's implementing the framework. So you build your foundation, you build your model on top of that, you drive to your TBM outcomes, and then you align those TBM outcomes with the organizational value drivers. And this is what makes TBM a central part of C-level conversations, right? It's where you get the holy trinity, the CIO, the CFO, and the CEO working together to ensure that technology is delivering business results, not just technology results. And so when you start to look at that, I wanted to bring in, Todd, I know in the report, we talk about 4 value drivers, and some of those are up or implied in a couple of these things on the top row. So why don't you walk everybody through those 4 value drivers and talk to them? And if you need to take the screen back, I'm going to drop this off. People can pick this up on the knowledge base, but tie the framework to how we think about the value levers for cyber.
Okay, yeah, and I'll just reshare, and we'll go back to here. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, good. So yeah, the 4 value drivers that we identified in this paper, you can see here. One is reducing the risk of loss. And I have it bolded because when we talk to folks, like I shared this paper with some of our board members, and their feedback was the risk of loss obviously is their focus. They're CISOs, right? So they're most interested in how are they managing risk, how are they mitigating risk cost effectively. So that number one is primary for them. But the other three were also, they recognize like there is a role for that, reducing the cost of security itself, right? I think, benchmarking security cost is something that organizations should be doing at whatever level they might be doing it, at the resource towers or otherwise. But to making sure you're getting, that value for the money from just the security spending on the cost side. So that's a big deal. Three, improving revenue. This is one where, the folks that I talked to about it, they said, it's something that we strive for. We want to be part of that conversation coming from the security side, but it's something that they struggle with. However, there are a lot of things you can do to improve your brand, to improve customer loyalty, to avoid damaging customer loyalty with cybersecurity. So number three does play a part. It may just not be something that is a focus when you're looking at the return on investment from cybersecurity. And then productivity is another thing. A lot of what security teams will do with controls, it can impede productivity. So by investing better, or sometimes choosing maybe not to put controls in place, which is a tough thing for a lot of companies. But if you understand the risk, sometimes the answer is don't make it harder on your people. Don't make it harder on your customers. And if you can prove that it's a risk-wise thing to do, it can make sense. So these were the four, but it's that number one, reducing that risk of loss. And that's where, back to this, kind of like looking at the return on investment, there's two sides of it, right? One is understanding the risk reduction, and one is understanding the cost. I mean, standard kind of return on investment model. And from a perspective of like what we looked at, this is literally like a very simple slide that's been anonymized, but from one of our board members. And he shared, and he goes, I've changed the numbers here, but what you're seeing here is this is how they presented an investment in change of the way they do network access. So moving from a VPN to a more modern technology. And so you can see like on the left side here, there's like, what's the likelihood of a breach? What's the frequency of that? These are kind of inverse of one another. They're highly correlated. And then the third is what's the loss exposure, and then how does that change with the move from VPN to this new technology? And you can see then what the risk reduction is, what the cost is. Now, he did not go so far as to calculate ROI with this. Obviously didn't feel like it was necessary, but you can see like this is what we're talking about when you say like we want to show value from the investments we're making. It's not going from red to yellow, which is a very common kind of approach, and saying, oh yeah, this will reduce risk, and we think it takes us from a high risk to a medium risk or to a low risk. Instead, it's saying it will reduce it by, in this case, $7.4 million, and that's something that you can base your investment on. So hopefully that makes sense. Is that helpful, Matt?
That is, and there's two ways that we're really trying to work with folks here. So at the big picture, when we showed that framework, we're trying to make sure TBM can account for 100% of tech spend. And so, when we a lot of times talk about cloud, the average cloud spend is 17% according to Gartner's latest research. We want to get to the full 100. So that's where we're bringing in things like FinOps, ITFM, portfolio. Dan was mentioning about portfolios. And this is where NIST has to come in, because you can't make good decisions without bringing in the risk and the cyber side of things. And so that enables us to do that for the CIO, but we can also do this with the CISO, right? There's two different ways we can think about this. And so we really want to try and push on that. So I just posted in the chat. If you have questions, you can post them in the chat, or like Dan did, if you want to put your hand up, please do that and jump in. Todd, the next thing I wanted to ask you is I showed the new framework 2.0. We have something called taxonomy 5.0. I mentioned that you used to work for the council, that you can actually honestly say that you wrote the book on TBM because you did write a book on TBM. But what I'm curious is, we did some things in the taxonomy to bring cyber into the equation. And, with this is kind of showing how TBM and FAIR are working together. Can you just talk on that a little bit around how that taxonomy can help people get the most out of their cyber?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm assuming, a lot of you are familiar with the taxonomy, but if you're not, it is the business language of tech, right? Like, you have to look at that as this is the mechanism that allows us to translate between a technology view to a business view. So, you look at the top of that taxonomy and you see things that are purely in a business language. And that's really essential, right? So you use that for, modeling costs and translating costs, but you can use it in so many other ways to speak that language. Well, one of the things that you saw with, like, Matt, with what you shared, that incorporation and frankly, like, the emphasis on risk and compliance, that's so important, because so much of the spend, and I know many of you are directly involved and feel this like probably every day, but that spend on, cybersecurity technology is just continuing to grow. And, I know CIO after CIO that we've talked to, Matt, obviously through some of the roundtables we've done, like, they are grappling with this and they need to ensure that there's value for that. So that's the thing. But a lot of that spend is in their portfolios, right? It's not spend by the CISO of the company. It's spend that they're being mandated to, as a CIO or even as a business unit. They're being required to spend the money to meet regulatory requirements or just, good sort of risk practices. So for CIOs and for your business partners to have that awareness of, like, hey, this is how it's affecting the cost of what we're delivering. It's, affecting the value of what we're delivering, perceived or otherwise, right? That's just so important to have. And the taxonomy, including that, makes that possible now in a way that I don't think it was quite as clear as it was with the previous versions.
Excellent. So let's do this. I just saw a first hand came up from John Birch. We'll go to John and then we'll go to Lisa after that. So John, you got a question? Come off mute, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, it seems to be triple muted there. My question is around this taxonomy. To my experience, one of the things that the industry is still struggling with is some outdated, ossified structures dictated by ITIL. It affects the regulatory agencies that dictate, whether a bank can buy a bank, and specifically regarding the ephemerality and elasticity of IT items. So dictating that a particular item, I said this to somebody recently, Aristotle defined a man as a rational animal. But in today's world, we'd have to say a rational animal that actually exists, because containers and microservices pop in and out of existence. Servers have varying memory and storage capacity and I/O. And some of the dictated structures that say, from an ITAM perspective or whatever, this asset must be defined, and in order for it to have this existence, it must have these CI attributes. Where do you see TBM or FAIR in starting to sort of better recognize the changing attributes and characteristics of IT assets and how they're defined?
Matt, do you want to take it from a TBM and then I'll layer on from FAIR?
No, you go first. You're fine.
Yeah.
And then, because I thought I might want to go a slightly different direction. So do the FAIR side first.
Yeah. I mean, so the way I see that is we're living in, a software-defined world. It's one that it's funny because Frank mentions that, below. And the reality is like the data that you use to manage your environment or is reflective of how you're managing your environment is something that you have to be using in the way you measure and communicate it and all that. And I think for TBM and FAIR, they've both been going through this evolution over literally like over decades. And whether you called it TBM or ITFM back in the day, et cetera, and FAIR's kind of the same way, is you have to find ways to leverage your operational data and connect it with the business. And I think that's been the bigger challenge is how do we translate this operational environment that's expressed in technical assets that, by the way, your business partners don't speak that language, right? So how do we translate that, and then how do we understand the risk of it? And that's where I come back to the taxonomy, the model, the way we're looking at FAIR is you have to have ways to use that data and represent that, report on it, et cetera. So to me, it's a data thing at the end of the day, right? It's kind of like a bit of a technical challenge to create that view and that perspective that makes sense to those that are running the business, that are spending money, that are responsible for the bottom line, right? That's what we have to do. I don't know if I'm quite answering it, but that's how I see it. Is it comes down to how you manage it with the data you have.
Well, the thing I was going to do, and I wanted you to answer first, because I tend to think bigger picture. And the thing I was going to go back to the framework side of it, and it's that common language, which then gets informed by the data, which to me becomes the really big part. And I mentioned before that holy trinity, where we're seeing the people that have this most success, this TBM by design. And oh, by the way, we do have a paper on the knowledge base about that if you want to get it. But that ability to really get that structured approach across those 5 foundational layers, of which data is one key, change management, your methods, your roles, and then the tools. It's that combination of those that you have to use, and then using that common language that the framework presents that are going to get you where you need to be on that. So that was the bit that I didn't want to go off on a tangent, but I think that starts to get you where you need to be, John. Let's go to Lisa.
Thank you.
Hey there. Hey, Todd.
Lisa.
Good to see you.
Yep, likewise.
Yeah, thanks for bringing forward this topic. When I saw it pop up, I was excited about it just because, just the level of uncertainty and just always having or being able to measure, risk has really not been tackled. So at least in my eyes. So thanks for bringing it forward. My question is more drilling into how you quantify cyber probability. Really curious about your framework and whether you're considering more internal versus external data in figuring out the probability of the risk, because I think as a finance person, that typically is where my head goes is, why should I believe that this risk is going to happen in our environment? So that just seems like a key KPI that I would be looking at and wanting to better understand. So if you could expand on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. And I won't bore you with the slides, but I will just say that, we through the FAIR methodology, you take both internal and external data to the extent you have it. But no matter what, you will always have a lot of uncertainty, right? It could be you just suffered a breach of, let's say, ransomware, right? You've suffered a ransomware breach. Does that mean you're more likely to suffer one in the future? Probably not, because you probably fixed certain things as a result of that response. So it's not just, we can only rely on internal data. You really have to look at external. And what I always recommend is your cybersecurity teams in most organizations, you'll have threat intelligence. They'll be paying for commercial threat data. They'll also use, be members of like an ISAC, which is industry specific. There's various ways. And then there's third-party reports, like I mentioned earlier, and using that to get a handle on what it is. So I'll give you an example, right? Like a very recent example. If you're in retail, you've heard of scattered spider. And it's like one of these things that it's a Chinese threat actor that has breached a number of retailers over the last, many years, but especially recently. And so the threat intel teams know of this. They know that, hey, this is a threat that's escalating. They know the methods that they use, and they can be much more scientific about it. But there's still a lot of unknowns. So the way we deal with the unknown, Lisa, is we deal with ranges and we deal with likelihoods, and we apply statistical models, what's called Monte Carlo simulations. You probably know, like anybody who's gone through finance has learned that years ago. So we use those techniques to deal with that uncertainty and come up with something that is judged reliable. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great question.
Okay, let's do this. There's one in the chat, Todd. I'm going to read through it for you. It's from Frank. A successful ransomware attack could be regarded as a software-defined disaster, which is also subject to threat, vulnerability, and cost analysis.
Yeah.
What are the similarities and differences when doing a business continuity management compared to a TBM FAIR approach when it comes to assess the business financial risks?
Yeah, great question. And Frank, like my view is that, first of all, these teams that do this, so those that are doing like cyber risk analysis, should be working with their business continuity teams. That's obviously it's a big deal. It's becoming a bigger deal because continuity is now dealing with your threat actors. It used to be, we worried about tornadoes and earthquakes, but now they worry about ransomware and other threat actors. And so it's escalated or elevated this. And then you got regulations like DORA in the European Union that is really driving resiliency. So that topic, weave together. So business impact assessment, which is a typical step you take in business continuity management, that is an invaluable resource to use when looking at your risk, right? Because it's going to look at the susceptibility to certain types of threats. It's going to look at the timeline to respond and things like that. Where it sometimes is a little immature is in the translating that into a financial impact. Not always. Sometimes they do a great job with that. But if they're struggling with that, that's an area where you can use, again, like the FAIR model to understand what that impact is. And then again, any investment you're making from a continuity or resiliency perspective, like TBM helps you understand that investment better, understand what it's going to impact in terms of the services or capabilities or what have you that you're delivering, an impact on the business. So I think that those two paired together help any business continuity approach, augment those, where needed. I hope that helps.
I think it does. All right, no other hands. Todd, we're coming up on time. I want to ask you one last question. From your observation with the 17,000 people that you have in the FAIR Institute, how do you see them? Like, how are they managing cyber spend today? Are they using TCOs? Are they moving to a more consumptive model? What are people doing to really get their hands around this? Is it still just scattershot, or is there an opportunity here really for TBM to help consolidate a lot of the thinking?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of scattershot. I mean, Matt, I don't have great numbers on this, but just anecdotally and the conversations I had around this white paper with some of our board members brought this up. And, they're like, well, we do, the answer is we do whatever finance tells us to do, right? Like, so when they're, talking about their spend and consumption, they're making the business case, they're using the methodologies that the finance team expects. A lot of times this is like NPV or ROI when they're making the case, and then they're using like FAIR to understand risk on top of it. Some of them, though, are moving to or have moved to either like security as a service model. That is not uncommon. I think it used to be very uncommon. Now it's a lot more common that they're, delivering security as, sort of known commodities, services that are provided for which they have different ways of kind of recovering. It came up at the board retreat last week, right? Where some of the folks were like, yeah, we do provide like transparency into that spending, and we do price it where necessary. The key is, though, you don't want to discourage it. You don't want it to be punitive where people feel like they either have the option when they don't, or where they choose the less secure route. So there's a lot of kind of complexities there, but I do think CISOs are trying to show value for spend, because there's more and more. It's not that there's pushback on the idea of it. It's just that businesses have been grappling with ever increasing spend. And so they're starting to ask the hard questions that maybe they weren't asking 5, 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think this is where the TBM, I keep saying, the CIO, the CFO, the CEO, but like obviously, even from just a tech perspective, bringing the CIO, the CTO, and the CISO together has benefits. And I just saw another data point from Gartner, and it was talking about AI, and it's something like 73%, it was over 70% of the people surveyed are going to be bringing in AI specific roles for leadership. And so when you look at that data point out there, that's just another one getting added to the mix. And so this importance, and it's interesting. I don't know if we really mentioned AI often on this call, if at all, until I just said it. But when you start thinking about AI and some of the security challenges and all, you're going to be bringing together different stakeholders that are going to need common grounds for how you assess value and deliver upon that. And so I think this is why we got the two organizations together. And just as we wrap up for everybody, really appreciate everyone joining the call. You can always follow up with any questions or anything like that. Jasmine just put some, there's some, the TBM by design documents in the chat. You can also get a copy of the TBM and FAIR document that we wrote in the chat. You can always visit the resource center, and then this video will be posted to our YouTube channel. So make sure if you need it, you can get there, but also make sure you're checking that out periodically. Any follow-up questions for Todd, feel free. If you can hit him up on LinkedIn, great. If not, get to me or to Jasmine or Nick, and we'll direct them in that way. But we thank everybody for their time today. You're going to see a lot more from the FAIR Institute and TBM working together. You're going to see us at each other's events, and you're going to definitely see Todd in Miami in November. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day and a great week. Bye now.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.